Travel overnight like a pro travel hacker. Save valuable daytime, time and money for accommodation by traveling while sleeping, therefore using your time twice. The concept is fairly simple. You just travel while you sleep. Nothing about this is revolutionary. Nevertheless, most people probably don't use it to the extent they could, since most people probably value their sleep more than saving time and money by traveling overnight. Of course, one could argue, so there's a picture I took. It's a night somewhere in Austria, not the same as night somewhere in Australia. That's the description. Of course, one could argue that a perfect night of sleep is always the better option, but when it comes to trading a little bit of sleep quality in for having a full day ahead of you, I think the overnight thing was and still is worth giving a shot. By the way, I am writing this sitting in a Flixbus. It's 5 a.m. The Flixbus started just before midnight. The roads are not heavily congested. Not too heavily, at least. This is already one of the first big advantages. Less congestion. When it comes to traveling via plane or train, this of course doesn't matter that much. But when it comes to still taking public transport and actually driving on the roads, then here is how time influences congestion. Most people drive awake. Therefore, when driving at night, there are fewer people awake, usually, because most people still at least kind of follow their circadian rhythms, even when slightly shifted and extended towards the night, and sleep at night. Therefore, fewer cars on the roads, therefore fewer vehicles in general. But still, the biggest advantage is having the full day. Because you use your time twice. When it comes to using your time, the thing you do is the thing you do primarily. Therefore, we call the first thing the thing that therefore kicks out all the other things you could do or could be doing during that time, at that time, primary activity. And the thing, primary activity, and the thing you can do, the thing is, okay, and the thing you can do on top of the primary thing is called secondary activity. Another thing is this: traveling and sleeping are two activities that have to be done as the main thing. This of course doesn't necessarily mean that the primary activity for us now traveling cannot be combined with another secondary activity like riding, as I am currently doing it. In many cases, the efficiency of the second activity isn't that much reduced by having another primary activity added before the secondary activity. I probably could type, edit, and upload a little bit faster while working from a desk with stable Wi-Fi, but this allows me to use my time twice. It's also not the most revolutionary concept ever. Everybody probably got at least some experience in combining activities in this way, a la, quote, texting while driving, quote, by nobody, apparently. And no, we don't count activities usually done by your subconscious or already automated by your system one, the you, that's not the thinking you, like standing, sitting, walking, digesting as activities. But when we sleep, our system two, the part of our brain we think of as ourselves, is, well, kind of gone. At least in some parts of the sleep. In others, we are still awake. But in a simulated reality, our system one simulates everything we can experience entirely for us as system two. We usually call this dreaming, but this is just a small insert about how we think, using a model the psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky developed in Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, or Thinking Fast and Slow, it's actually called. Back to traveling, you can use this concept of using time twice like this, adding a secondary activity whenever this doesn't reduce the efficiency of the first activity too much. As a rule of thumb, I usually accept 10% less efficiency whenever I try to add another formerly primary activity as a secondary activity to an already primary model, meaning if I miss the next train or bus because I didn't spend enough time during traveling planning the next step of the trip, because let's say I wrote this during the trip, then chances are I take the next one. But that misses the point. See, planning while traveling is also already an again use of this hack we just discovered together. Actually, we use it constantly, all the time. Most of us just think. Whenever we do something which cannot be combined with something else we think of as an activity. If you do the chores, you probably usually add thinking about your day or other stuff as a secondary activity, but you could also listen to an audiobook if you preferred to. Therefore, it's not so much about adding activities to your life, but rather switching to those you choose. The ones you just might prefer more. Of course, you can look at the landscape while traveling if you prefer to. It's totally up to you to now use this hack and combine sleeping and traveling in the meanwhile. The special thing about the activities of sleeping and traveling is the fact that both usually need to be primary. Therefore, whenever you combine two activities that usually need to be primary, you did not necessarily already save time, but what you indeed did is this: you prevented future time from being blocked by those. Here's a small graph. I will explain it. So this is a timeline here. So for all the ones only listening, we have a timeline. It's an arrow pointed to the right, because in Western society or culture, we usually read from left to right. Now, therefore also time goes from left to right. Now, we have these blocks, and what a calendar usually is it takes a chunk out of this timeline and then says and then we do not look at it linearly, but from the bottom to the top, from the top to bottom. Therefore, if we now take the slots you would usually have in a calendar in a single day and you just distribute them along the timeline again, you again go from left to right. Therefore now we have this block called sleep, which is for most people maybe 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, and we have this block called traveling, which from cities to city in Europe maybe also 7 to 8 hours, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. The thing is, if you combine those activities, so in this scenario now, these two blocks prevent other blocks from being done at that particular time. So if this is day 1 maybe and this is day 2, I don't know, it could be this same day. The thing is, you cannot visit Paris the same day you travel to Paris. That's a bummer. And you can also not visit the Eiffel Tower while you sleep. Essentially, this blocks other future activities. These two blocks block other future activities from happening at this specific and particular time. Now, if we combine those two into one, then they only block basically one time slot. And also, you cannot do anything else because sleeping really is primary and there cannot be anything other primary done unless it's something like traveling, which doesn't require, which is still primary because it blocks your time, but you don't need your brain in this time. At least not your conscious brain. It's the same while traveling. You just sit on a bus. Basically, the only thing that happens while traveling is that the physical you is transported geographically to another location. Now, so much about the graph. Combining both usually primary activities, traveling and sleeping, this is what the graph about, and therefore that's the description, and therefore I just read it. Now, continuing with the post. Each primary activity essentially blocks a slot within the timeline that is your life, divided into years, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, seconds. But now the thing is, whenever you find activities you would have done anyway, and you actually can find a combination that works, like getting rid of your reading time by doing the dishes and listening to audiobooks in the meanwhile, or by traveling while sleeping, you just freed up time blocks, and therefore you are more flexible planning the rest of your time, or your life, or your life's time. In order to have a great life, in order to have a great timeline, in order for you to have a great lifetime, in order for you to use the time and have the time of your life.